Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you could be with us tonight on the Peculiar Book Club. We have a couple really exciting announcements later today, but first and foremost, we are going to talk about the Icepick Surgeon. And I don't know about any of you, but there's some things in this book that I definitely didn't know and that might keep me up nights. And I'm sure you can't wait to start asking questions about it. I know Davey's excited too.
Yes, I am. I'm very excited for this one. This was it's strange to say an enjoyable listen, but I loved how each chapter was its own little story, and there were so many fun stories throughout. And of course, mad scientists. I mean,
Right, of course.
the movies, pop culture is just filled with mad scientists. We have a fun quiz for Sam at the end of this one.
And for some strange reason, I have a logo. I don't know why. We haven't quite figured that out. Also, just so you guys know, here in Cleveland, we've got to that point in the year where it's partly Satan's armpit and partly Hell's front porch. So it's hot and it's sticky. And we're just ready to do some gothy weird science. So welcome, Sam.
Hello, everyone.
I feel like we need to work out some kind of like a little explosion when you guys come on. So like, poof, Sam.
Oh, some smoke I can come out of. All right.
Yeah, that'd be great. Or you could come out brandishing an ice pick. I tried very hard to find an appropriate drink for your book. And I did have a slight adventure with something that looks a lot like an ice pick, but might have been a screwdriver. And I nearly impaled myself trying to break my ice.
Oh, okay. You have all 10 fingers still?
I do.
Okay,
I hope everyone else is okay. We're seeing some hellos from people. We've got a lot of folks here. New hair. It's Satan's armpit. That's what that is. Casey says hi. We've got some people from the UK. You're up late. And also Alexandria, Virginia. And, there's Susan Ballinger. We've got everybody's here. I'm really excited. I think I missed some other ones. Maybe you can go fishing for those. Looks like Mike's here as well. These are our regulars, and we've got quite a lot of other folks coming too. As you guys know, comments, go ahead and type them in, and I will go fishing for them and put them on the screen to talk to Sam. But just to start off, let us introduce this lovely cocktail. I ended up using a hammer on my ice. Did anyone else try it? Did you try it, Sam?
I don't have an ice pick either, so no. I tried the drink. Yes, I tried the drink. So yeah,
good. So we didn't name it. And what name did you choose, Sam?
The lobotomizer.
The lobotomizer. So the lobotomizer name pick. I can come find you later. You can drop me an email. Congratulations! We're very excited to now have a name for this lovely beverage. Let's see. I was looking to see if anybody popped in here. If you can go ahead and say yourself too. Oh, we've got someone in steamy Connecticut as well. So that is what we're going to start with. And I feel like we might need a little bit of a drink, possibly, to deal with some of the questions in this book. And the questions are already popping. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in.
Okay.
Let's see here. Oh, we've also got quite a lot of, we've got some science teachers here too. What was your favorite chapter to write? I kind of have that question too, frankly.
Ooh, my favorite chapter. It kind of varied a little bit in that some of the chapters I was really just fascinated with the characters, like the title chapter about Walter Freeman, the lobotomist. I've always been fascinated with his character, his motivations, everything about him. So that was an interesting chapter for me to write. But I was also really... some of the chapters do get a little heavy, a little dark. So some of the more fun chapters for me to write were the ones that were a little lighter, like the paleontologists who hated each other and they would sabotage each other's work, or the botanist William Dampier, who was so obsessed with natural history that he became a pirate. So he'd go around the world and go to different ports and learn about different plants and animals, things like that. So there was this kind of fascination with the characters and the people involved, but also the fun chapters were a nice relief sometimes. Oh, also at the end, I got to write about the future of crime, which was enjoyable as well. So kind of an appendix, not a chapter, but.
That's true, but it was so appropriate at the same time. We saw a couple of. I just want to say there's a lot of science teachers here tonight. They're super jazzed about being here.
Hello, all science teachers. Great.
Yeah, they're great. Another question, and this is kind of maybe. Oops, I just lost it. Where'd it go? You guys are fast typers. Someone asked about choosing the worst. The hardest part was working out the worst, right? Enjoying the way the chapters are set up, not only historically, but I found myself wondering, what is the height of villainy?
What is the height of villainy? Well, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to talk about some of the worst cases in there. The Nazis inducing suffering with cases that really had no medical value, things like that. I think those were clearly the worst cases in the book because there really was no scientific purpose behind it. There was just sort of a sadism behind it. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really want to dwell on those worst cases because they're the ones that are really hard to take. But in some ways, I think they're less interesting because to me, the most interesting ones were the people who did, at least at the very beginning, have a good impulse. They had a good goal in mind, or they were just fascinated with some topic and just got so into it and just were so excited about it that they kind of lost the wider picture, and they almost lost their humanity in some ways.
Yeah,
and I really find that
fascinating.
Yeah, I find that fascinating too. That idea that you can take something like the pursuit of knowledge, which is usually a good thing, and it gets twisted in kind of this dark way. And I just found that combination of things really fascinating.
Well, and don't you think too that it's like having blinders on, isn't it? You're so focused that you almost. I ran into that some with the book I was writing too, where it's just you're so dedicated. It's almost like you get myopic about it. Someone talks a little bit about Phineas Gage, and Phineas Gage being an accidental lobotomy, of course.
Right. Yeah.
Whoopsie, Davey, I might need your help. For some reason I keep skipping forward, and then I can't. Where is it? Oh, about the Dino Hunter. So several people were asking about that. I did not know about this. I mean, I knew that there were rivalries. I did not know there was a specific dinosaur bone fight.
Yes, the Cope and Marsh, the Bone Wars. I'd heard inklings about it before, partly because they were the ones who really made dinosaurs, what we consider sort of these iconic creatures that we all run to in the museum when we're so excited to see. Before Cope and Marsh, people had known about dinosaurs, but they were kind of this obscure taxon of lizard, and no one really cared much about it. They were the ones who made them the iconic thing that they are today. And it was just really interesting to read about how they started as friends and how they ended up turning on each other for all these completely petty, totally believable reasons. You see this, I mean, you would know better than me, like among academics, you just see the little fights they get into and all of this stuff. And that was one of the more fun chapters to write because you could kind of indulge in that pettiness and just watch them get nastier and nastier, go to the newspapers with it. It was great.
Well, and faking each other out in all these peculiar ways. I mean, that was really, really interesting. The other thing I thought was fun about that is you don't necessarily, you would think that you'd see that with Darwin because there was this very close rivalry, and yet it doesn't happen there, but it happens over paleontology.
Yeah, Darwin was Darwin didn't like the rough and tumble the way the other people did. Right. He kind of sent out Huxley to do that for him. But he was just a little more retiring, yeah.
Well, don't you think too, though, paleontologists, there's a little bit of a cowboy. I mean, right? There's a cow person, I should say. There's a bit of a cow person in that world, I think. I see a couple questions, one by Todd Ryan and one by Susan Ballinger, about the article you used to discuss honesty was retracted for faking data. And then Susan Ballinger saying, but the ethics of using that data is so fascinating. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a good lesson that you can never quite trust anything. So it's toward the end of the book. It was, maybe a page or so in the book. And I was talking about different ways that you can possibly prevent these things from going on, where you can maybe, notice something unethical going on, stuff like that. And there was a famous study about this that came out in 2012, I think, where they looked at basically cheating and how to get people to stop cheating. And their little hack was that they had people, in theory, sign at the beginning of a form or sign at the end of the form. So it's kind of like in court where they swear you in beforehand as opposed to afterhand, because when ethics are in mind at the beginning of the task, you're supposed to be more ethical. Okay. There are actually two parts of the study. So the first part has had some replication issues. It's kind of going on with a lot of different social science nowadays. So that part's a bit up in the air. So that part we're a little unclear about. It was the second part of the study, which was about, they went and looked at a real world case where they got insurance data, basically about driving cars. So it's supposed to be, again, a real world example. And the data's fishy. It's definitely fishy. I am not a sort of statistician where I could explain all the details, but it does seem fairly fishy. And it's unclear whether the scientists were doing it, or one scientist, I guess, or the insurance company was doing it. But that part they have asked to be withdrawn and retracted. So it's a good ironic lesson in that, you know, the study on being honest was itself faked, but you know, it's a good example also of being careful and understanding that science is a provisional process, and that it's something that is constantly evolving.
I think that's something that gets lost a lot with the COVID research. People say, well, they said one thing and then they said something else. And it's like, well, as you learn more things, you want science to change. You don't want them to, otherwise we'd still be using leeches, you know. Not that there's anything wrong with leeches. I knew someone who had a pet leech named Harvey. So
Harvey, after William Harvey, or why?
Leanne asks, says she loved the cover art, and can you give us some background? I'll just hold mine up. I was kind of surprised to see it in pink and blue. I like it, but I was, you know, I mean, you think like death and dastardly deeds and piracy, and they were like, how about pink and blue? And I love it. Thoughts?
It pops, I guess. Yeah,
it does. But what was the background? Did you help choose it at all, or?
Yeah, I don't have much artistic ability, so I wasn't really involved in the actual design of it. But I've been thrilled with all of my book covers. I think they have done a really, really, you can see one kind of over my shoulder there, but I think they have done a really great job with all of them. And I don't know what your experience was with yours, but it's sort of, you have kind of veto power over the cover, that if you feel it's misleading or you just really hate it, you can say, no, I don't like that. But we've had great luck so far, so I've been quite happy with that.
I was really lucky with mine because I had just had my website redone. I have my website is awesome, and my website designers are amazing. And they had created this background, and the background had like some of the colors and some of the head stuff. So actually, I ended up sort of sharing that, and the book cover kind of. So there was a real symbiotic relationship between my website and the book, in ways that I don't think. That's not normal. It's just so happened that I was redoing my website at the same time. So it worked out really well. But my input was basically like science-y, not Frankenstein. My book sounds like, we're going to be doing my book in October. My book sounds like Frankenstein. I was like, I'm a little worried people are going to think it's fiction already. So talking about head transplant. And that's true. It's been misshelved. I've found it like in the wrong places before at bookshelf. Like I'll go to sign the book and be like, you know, this is nonfiction, right? So,
wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what can you say? Love Mike's comment here. Were there any any dastardly folks that didn't make the final cut? That wasn't quite awful enough, or was too awful?
You know, I considered some chapters on people like Elizabeth Holmes, the Theranos person. But she was ultimately doing it for money and glory, things like that, which are, to me, a little bit more sort of everyday avarice. Yeah, as opposed to, again, people doing it for the pursuit of knowledge.
Right.
I was also considering a chapter, I forget kind of the details, but there are certain people out there who were scientists, quote unquote, for the tobacco industry. And they were really involved in the movement where you're sort of casting doubt on science. Your doubt is the product, I think is the famous phrase. But these people actually became consultants in chemical industries, for other industries. They were not experts in these fields, but they were very good about sowing doubt and kind of using the healthy doubt of science against itself. So there were some chapters like that where they were doing bad things. It just didn't quite fit in with the theme of the book.
Right. No, I mean, it's sad what you have to leave out, frankly. Otherwise,
I mean, that's the joke, is you can judge the quality of the book by what you have to leave on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, so. That's true. So people get blinded by the pursuit of success. I think that's absolutely a big point that you have in yours. got obsessed with barnacles and didn't notice. Poor Darwin and his barnacles.
I love that story. Yeah.
Let's see here. I just skipped ahead again. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here, Davey, but there we go. There was a lot of trouble with Sue the T-Rex skeleton somewhat recently as well. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that was in South Dakota where I'm from. So
tell us a little bit about that.
She was found on, I don't remember the details now. Of course, now that I said that. It was basically the most complete T-Rex skeleton that's ever been found. But there was a fight over who was going to get the rights to her. I think it was a conflict between where the land it was on and who actually found it, because they realized how valuable it was going to be. Mm-hmm. And I think it ended up in private hands, but sold it to a museum, if I remember properly. Mm-hmm. But I remember that being kind of a big deal when I was a kid, because it was just an amazing, amazing skeleton.
It is. I mean, and even though the skull itself was a bit crushed, if I'm not mistaken, right? And they had to reconstitute that. They
might have, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see here. Asking about honesty at the beginning of an article rather than at the end. That is a really interesting point. I used to teach engineers, and one of the things I used to show them those engineering disasters videos, and I was explaining to them that things always fail on either communication, ethics, or design, or sometimes some combination of three of these. And I explained to them that, like, you know, when you have a family to feed and a job at stake is not the time to start thinking about ethics. Like, you do kind of want to front load and get into the habit of that. But it's not a fail safe at all. Definitely not. All right, let's see here. What do we hear? Well, that's good. So same kind of thing.
They're using one of these nudges. Yeah. And, you know, I think there is something to it. As I mentioned before, they make you, when you're at court, they make you swear before you give your testimony because it keeps it in mind. And, you know, I think it sounds a little cynical, but I think that with forms, at least, where you in theory can go back, you need to make it easy for people to be honest. Because, you know, you get to the end of the form, you might feel guilty about it, but, you know, it's a pain in the butt. Who's gonna bother? You just have in mind from the beginning. I think that's a much healthier way to do it. And sort of in a broader perspective, that's why they have institutional review boards, looking at human subjects work, things like that. And that's really important because, you know, I think if you were truly determined to do something bad, you could probably game the system. You could probably get away with doing the harm, even if you might get caught later. But again, a lot of the people in the book, they didn't set out to do bad things. They just got too far in the process. And I do think that review boards can act as sort of a circuit breaker and stop those kind of things.
Yeah, there's a real sense in which the ends justifying the means. I keep referring back to my book, but I thought about my work a lot while I was reading this one because Dr. White wants to perform a head transplant on a human being, and like it never occurs to him that that's a bad idea. And I feel like somewhere along the way, probably it should occur to you that that might not be a good idea, you know. But it's like you're so focused on the science. Yeah.
Even if you want to pursue it later, you could think like the thought might occur to you. Yeah.
Right. So a couple of people were talking about we've got the murder of the academe. This is quite funny. The table had an extra leg and the chest had an actual chest in it. But
that's a good joke. That's good.
And Kayzabi saying, I'm surprised there isn't more murder in academia, to be honest. And frankly, I'm surprised for that too, because I absconded from academia. Sam, you're not in academia, are you? You're a journalist.
I'm not in academia. Yes. No.
So I was, but I ran away from it. So I was tenure track and everything, and you're not supposed to leave that. But again, I agree. I'm surprised there's not more murder. Maybe there are. We're just really good at hiding it, or nobody cares if you lose an academic. I'm not sure. Let's see here. Maybe they have to be peer reviewed before they murder people. That's possible. That would be part of it. Another question here. I got really angry with the debating experiment.
There might be the Unabomber one. Yeah, probably that one was one of those ones where you don't quite even know what they were thinking ahead of time. Where, you know, again, some of the other ones, they had good intentions at the beginning, but that one was just a little hard to understand what they were doing and why they thought it would be okay, and why they were just so brutal about it, frankly, and really kind of indifferent to the harm that they were doing. So, yeah, that one was tough to write about, and tough to kind of watch the suffering that these people went through.
I was really surprised by some of the things. I said, I mean, I know a lot of these stories, so when you can surprise me, I'm like, oh, well done, Sam. I don't know that one. I cite you in my other book. It's true. So we were a little chat here about the animal murder chapter, and how difficult that can be. So my question, I ended up having to deal with that in my own work. So, Mr. Humble and Dr. Butcher, you don't get perfusion technology until you have 300 desiccated monkey brains, and these are primates. I mean, I struggled with that, and people, most people reviewed my book positively. There was one negative review from in the UK for The Spectator, and she was just like, "I hated this book. I don't want to know how we got our science." And I thought that was really interesting, because that's kind of what you're pointing out, isn't it?
Yeah, that's revealing. And I knew kind of going in that chapter would be tough for people. I'm sure my mom did not get through that chapter, among many others. But I do think that, I mean, that's one thing I tried to do with all of the stories in the book, was show that they do have a connection to modern times. These aren't things that we are sort of safely buried in our past and that we can just forget about. And with the animal chapter, I did want to at least get us thinking about the fact that we still do use lots and lots of animals in research. And there's no question that, especially in the past, it's done good overall. We've gotten good treatments for people. But I do think there are a lot of people concerned that there are diminishing returns with that kind of work, and that the sheer scale of it would shock a lot of people. And I hadn't seen that review, but I'm not surprised that someone said something like that there's a lot of people just kind of want to close their eyes and not think about it.
Well, it wasn't so much that she was upset about, because I found it upset. I mean, frankly, I had to watch the videos of these things happening in color. I mean, it was, we'll get to that in October, folks, when we do my book. But to have somebody say outright, and like very obviously, I don't want to know. I was like, don't you though? I mean, you don't really want to abdicate the responsibility for how these things get done, do you? We should want to be part of how these decisions get made. And so I think that's very interesting. And we got to talk about Nazis. I don't know why there aren't more questions about. Where are your questions without Nazis here, folks? I'm expecting Nazi questions. But seriously, that was what I started my Wall Street Journal review with, because I was like, oh my God, if you find out information in ways that are unethical, how do you treat that information? And that was just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, that is in some ways kind of the heart of the book, is whether that knowledge should be used nowadays. Specifically, you are talking about, so I guess to back up a little bit, there were lots of Nazi medical experiments, but as I kind of alluded to before, some of them were simply just sadistic, and there's no real question among historians or medical ethicists whether we should be using or looking at that data, because it has no medical value. They were doing things like trying to change eye color, or, transplanting limbs, things like that would not have worked, had no chance of working. There were other cases, though, especially the hypothermia studies, where they put people in baths of ice water, essentially, and tried different ways to revive them. And they found out that some of the conventional wisdom about how to revive people was frankly wrong. And people have not done similar experiments since then for obvious reasons. But that data is still there. And the question is, do we use that data? It was done on prisoners against their will. They were not volunteers. Many of them died for this. But if you had a child or something that fell through the ice and they pulled them out, there are two ways to do it. You can do it sort of the ethical way, where you use the conventional wisdom, or you can use the Nazi data that was gathered in horrific ways. But could it save their life? It's probably better data. And I don't think there are any easy answers to that. I just sort of presented both sides of it and talked about why people feel so strongly about it one way or the other. But again, I don't really know that there is a good answer to questions like that. So there are a few of those hard cases.
It's really interesting to me, because I think how we get information is something that a lot of our information is gotten in ways that we might not normally understand, right? I will use the example. Someone said this earlier, and I think about the sausage being made or whatever, and I think it's a good example because my parents owned a diner, and they sold rashers of bacon, right? Big. It looks like it came off of an animal, and my mother would slice it. And somebody came in and said, well, that's not bacon. That looks like that was from some kind of animal. And my mom was like, well, there's some things you probably ought to know.
Dear, yes.
So, but it does explain how, we don't always want to know how we arrive at things. And I thought the Nazi chapter was particularly interesting in that regard. And just so you know, I'm working on my next book proposal is actually looking at some of the at something that some of the doctors in that experiment, the hypothermia experiment, were doing before. And like one of them worked for a Jewish fellow and was like doing all these good things. And then the Nazis came in and he was like, yeah, I'll drown people for hypothermia. So it made me wonder, like, is this another example of somebody getting so passionate about something that they just...
Okay. Is it Sigmund, what's his name? Was it that? Okay.
Yeah. This is kind of interesting. Debate about the use of knowledge and that the kids are very passionate about. I love young people. I think young people have got such an interesting take on this because they're not, it hasn't been, the edges haven't been knocked off for them yet. It's still spiky and like, oh my God, why did we do that? Another question from Todd Ryan here. He says, I was amazed that a Nobel Prize could be awarded for the lobotomy guy. And he really wanted to check that out. I think that it's hard. I felt that way about the gonorrhea guy person who later comes back and helps with AIDS. I mean, how do you deal with that?
I think I would make kind of a distinction in those two cases. So to take the Nobel Prize one first, it was Egas Muniz was the person who won the prize, and he was different from Walter Freeman, who's the Icepick Surgeon, and that Walter Freeman was people called him the Henry Ford of lobotomies, and he loved the name because he wanted to take them to the masses. He wanted to do thousands of them, give everyone a lobotomy, and it would be a cure-all. Egas Muniz was focused on basically patients who had no other options. And I would not say he was very careful. He did not do animal studies. He did not do any close follow-up work. He was certainly not doing good science. And based on that, probably should not have won the Nobel Prize. But within the context of the work he was doing, he was trying to help people who were pretty desperate. And I think that's what other scientists and doctors were responding to in giving him that prize, was he had found a solution, an imperfect solution, to what was a pressing problem. So I think that's kind of what they were responding to, even if the science wasn't actually that good. The Cutler chapter that you just mentioned, he was more of someone who just, it's hard to even reconcile the two different people, because he went down to Guatemala and did these horrific experiments, actually killed people by injecting them with gonorrhea and syphilis and stuff. But then after that, went over to developing countries and would train obstetricians there so that women weren't dying of childbirth in these countries.
I wonder if he was trying to like find a balance.
Yeah, or kind of atone for his earlier sins or something like that. It's really not clear what he was doing. And I think I talked in the book about how he died in 2003 and the Guatemala experiments were not public at that point. And if you had just read his obituary, you would think he was the second coming of Albert Schweitzer. I mean, he just looked like he looked like he'd done so much good in the world. And then Susan Reverby, historian, came and exposed this experiment, and now he's probably go down in infamy.
And should do. So I had an interesting point here that this is true. This is the only chapter. Now, granted, I'm a little fluid when it comes to gender, so this is probably why it impacted me so much. But I feel the same. This was the most heartbreaking chapter that I read. It was just so difficult to deal with, and I don't know how the rest of you felt. I was actually trying to get through. I don't want to skip over questions, but I wanted to see if anybody else had. I think
someone mentioned the slavery chapter was heartbreaking for them. Yeah.
The slavery chapter was definitely heartbreaking, but like I think probably for the same reason that enforced dismissal, right? That dismissal of the selfhood, that's what happens to slaves too. this concept that your selfhood is taken away from you, and somebody else does that to you. I think that was probably, for some reason, those chapters paired in my brain in ways that I might not have expected.
Yeah. The chapter with John Money, I think that kind of gets to the core of it, is that he simply did not listen to what Brenda and then David wanted. He had a theory and he wanted to prove it, and he was going full forward on that theory, ignoring contrary data, doing all the bad things doing all the things that make it bad science. But you're just seeing this person suffer the entire time and basically didn't care, and was willing to, until it went public, was willing even not to take it back or even retract it at all. So, I mean, just on so many different levels.
We're a very sort of queer, trans-friendly book club here, and so I think that was particularly difficult for me, and it actually raised some questions. I ended up writing about some of this on Twitter about how the imposition of just how much we laugh about this, right? I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. This concept that as long as you have medical credentials, you're treated as though you are different, special, more. And this assumption that your ethics and that your heart's in the right place. And clearly for some of these people, it's not.
Yeah. I think this was coming in an era too. I was talking about this with someone the other day, where this was a time when, before World War II, if you back up a little bit, there were scientists around, obviously, but science was a much smaller profession. It was a little more genteel. There wasn't as much money in it, frankly, and people weren't doing experiments and work on the scale that they were during World War II and then after. And then suddenly there was a flood of money coming in due to the Cold War, among other things. And you had a lot more people going into the field. And then suddenly there was a lot less oversight because you had so many more people. It was a lot harder to police. And I think there was sort of this carryover from before, where scientists were kind of policing themselves, that attitude would carry over to afterward. And you see a lot of cases where it just frankly did not carry over.
I was astonished. I love this phrase where you were like, oh, you had doctors going, well, at least we're not Nazis, and kind of just moving on. And I thought, wow.
We're not as bad as the worst case scenario, and therefore
we're fine.
It must be,
I saw a couple interesting comments. This one was great. I was surprised that the AC/DC chapter, not the band, bugged me more than the Nazi chapter. And a couple other people, this is the discussion that was going on in Facebook. Davey actually asked a question that got a lot of traction, a lot of answers. Mike Breen had answered it in a couple different ways. I'm going to scroll down and see if I can find some of them. But, oops, well, I scrolled too far again. Davey, you're going to have to save me from myself here. But it's essentially really asking about, my God, no one can believe the kinds of things that Edison was willing to do for the showmanship of proving that he was right.
Yeah, not even that as much as just winning business. That's what it came down to on some level. And yeah, I think we learned about him in school. He was kind of an American saint, frankly. And I think there's been kind of a pushback on him, especially online, when people are talking about Tesla, especially. Tesla's the one who's kind of become the hero. But I think that lost in there is, the things that Edison did, not only with the animals, but with the death penalty as well, where in both cases, he was pretty ruthless about just trying to make DC, direct current, his preferred current system, win out in public demonstrations of some pretty awful things.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm sorry, I was scrolling through some of the comments that came across that I missed earlier, but it is kind of interesting. It was talking about, this is actually, I think, partly going back to the conversation about money. But doesn't it actually makes sense with Edison too? There was a real sense in which Edison was just the ruler of the day. The man
people
controlled
would just
everything.
walk up to it. Reporters would show up at his house and just say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And he would just pontificate. And he was very good about using the media to his advantage and winning publicity and things like that. So you're right.
Yeah, well, and the point about the billionaires rushing to space right now, that's absolutely true. We have our own version of this going on right now, in a couple different ways.
Yeah, we do. Hopefully with less bad results for animals and people in there. But yeah, you see that same sort of one-upmanship where they're doing things to win publicity for themselves, essentially.
It looked like Brandy fell off for a second, so I'm going to jump in here.
Okay.
Rudy says that she's never going to teach electricity the same way. So yeah, it really has changed things.
Okay.
Thank you, Davey, for saving me.
Yes,
I fell off. It's like I got so excited, I just fell off the stream. It happens.
That's great to hear, Rudy. That really is gratifying to me that it would sort of change the way you think about it. And hopefully the students will, I think it's good to introduce stories and things because I do think that's how people remember information. When it's in a story form, it makes it more powerful and makes it more interesting in some way. So I hope that it works out well for them.
I will say about the Edison and the Nazis thing, comparing those two chapters. Someone who's raised Jewish, just so much of the Holocaust and the Nazis is history, but dogs are around us. They're everywhere, and they're something that we try so hard to protect. So I could see how that chapter would hit home, where that other chapter feels more like history, but that Edison chapter feels so immediate.
Oh, it's a little more removed. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's pretty awful. I was seeing, can't imagine anything I feel strongly enough about to hurt another person. So reading that electric chair bit really got to me, and I agree. So I wrote about Edison and Tesla for my other book, Clockwork Futures, which is how I encountered all of this. And, I had always kind of thought of Edison as like, he's of the people, and Nikola Tesla being somebody who had more money and was kind of a little bit more uppity in some ways.
A little more elitist, yeah.
Yeah, but like when you read that out, you're like, oh no, the things he was willing to do.
And I don't think, you're not wrong about how he was kind of the people. There was really sort of a demonic aspect to him, but there was this other part of him. This other part of him where he was pretty ruthless. So there was a quote in the book about how someone complained that he had a vacuum where his conscience ought to be. Oh, and I think that does come through in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I just think I'm really excited about, so many of the folks in this feed are either teachers or ex-teachers or other things. And I'm really excited to see how much of this can still carry through. I mean, one of the things I was most moved by is, I have to say, I read your book right after getting this review saying, I don't want to know how science is done. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, like, I'm going to send you this book. I'm going to send you Sam's book. You need to know. And I think that this was interesting, too, about the natural history. And we were now arguing about whether or not museums ought to give their collections back to places where they were originally taken from. And I think that that's a really huge thing. I mean, stuff was stolen. I mean, it was just flat out stolen. Mm-hmm. But we think of it as, well, but we're saving history. We don't think about the fact that it was sent back on slave ships.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of a new aspect of this where I think there's sort of a history of science is kind of they call it like the Whig version of history, I think is the way they describe it, where it's just a series of progressions where things just get better and better and better. And, that is part of science, is we do build on previous knowledge and things do get better in some sense. But there is now a sense of looking at some of the sort of material aspects of it. And this part about the dependence on slavery, even for people like Isaac Newton or Carl Linnaeus, that you would not normally associate with that. I think there's more historians now willing to look at those kind of broader aspects. And I think that's a good thing. I think that is a little bit of more honest appraisal. And I don't think it's something that needs to kind of undermine the good things that science has done. But I think it is important to be honest about all of that happened.
Yeah, well, and I think too, we got somebody talking about that was interesting. I thought that your connection between the Queen's slave bees and the fact that he's using slave ships. I mean, I don't know if you meant to draw those parallels, but I certainly saw them too.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, so I guess what he was referring to was there was a footnote at least in there where I talked about termite queens and sort of like with queen bees and queen ants. We call them the queen of the colony, but in some ways their life is pretty awful. They're trapped in a little chamber, and all they do is give birth all day. They lie on their back and they give birth all day, that's all they do their entire lives, while people force jelly into their mouths, and that's all they do. So, and they're not really the ruler of the colony in any meaningful sense. So
Right.
I read that somewhere and it kind of flipped it for me, but I hadn't really thought about that in terms of the slave dynamic either.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just interesting to think how it was pitched, right? It was pitched that slavery is good for these people. Like that was that was the argument. Like, oh, it's good for them. They're getting culture. No, they're slaves. You're not fixing them. You're messing them up. Jennifer says, I learned so much from this book I'm going to pass on. The prettiest little vertebrae. That is a great line, I have to say. I don't disagree. Not all of history reader. That's true. That's sometimes we actually miss it. I don't want to take up too much more time because, you guys, we have some announcements and we have Davey. Davey's going to do the quiz. The quiz is going to be fantastic because dastardly deeds, I feel like, Davey, that's your thing, man. So I'm going to turn it over to Davey for a minute. Then I'm going to come back and give you guys not only some announcements, but also announce some more winners. And we have some winners chosen for swag, in addition to the cocktail name, and also somebody who won a signed copy. And we now have signed copies available for sale from Loganberry Books. So come back after Davey, and I'm going to give you some fun news. So I'm gonna peace out while you do that.
All right. So obviously, Sam, pop culture is filled with mad scientists, and I think you even pointed out in the book how a lot of these stories, I mean, the pirate story in the very beginning inspired countless pop culture characters and stories and fictional stories off of it. So, I mean, did you see that a lot where these characters became larger than life in other pop culture mediums?
Yeah, I think that kind of trope about the mad scientist is something that it's instantly recognizable, where you see that in lots of, comic books, comic book movies, things like that. And it's just something that we recognize, someone who gets so obsessed that they take something too far and they sort of lose their humanity in the process. So, yeah.
I did notice that it seems like a lot of the characters, because I found like an article of like 50 mad scientists from movies or something like that. They seem to almost be more destructive to themselves than the world, where the real life people really are destructive to a lot of people around them. The characters is almost a lesson. I feel like in the movies, the hero has to save the day. So,
interesting. Yeah.
They
I guess it's part of the movie is it makes them more interesting when they destroy themselves. So that's an interesting point. It makes them a deeper character. But you're right, in the real world, sometimes it's not as neat and gratifying, I guess.
I did want to ask you, if you were to, you mentioned comic books and comic book movies. If there was a Legion of Doom of all these characters in the book, who do you think would be the mastermind, the leader of the Legion of Doom? And I know that's a tough question to ask you cold.
Yeah. Boy, I'm trying to think of not necessarily based on how bad the deeds were, but how sort of ruthless they were. I think they would sort of rise to the top of the heap, I think. And I'm just trying to think of maybe either John Money. He was pretty aggressive, so I think, and kind of charismatic. So him, or maybe Henry Murray, the psychologist, would be sort of behind the scenes, kind of manipulating things. So one of those two, I think, would end up, and I could see them splitting and then going after each other too.
Of course,
so,
of course, you have to feud eventually.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into the quiz here. So obviously, the theme of this is mad scientists. So I am calling the quiz this week Mad Scientists of the Screen, and I'll flip us around so we can see Sam here. So the first one's a little bit of a softball for you, but so from the mind of H.G. Wells and captured on the screen many times, this mad scientist creates human-like beings from animals in his remote island laboratory. Is it A, Dr. Frankenstein, B, Dr. Jekyll, or C, Dr. Moreau?
It is C, Dr. Moreau, the island of Dr. Moreau, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt of any of the mad scientists I came across, these three are considered, they call them the unholy trinity of mad scientists in movies.
Okay.
So Dr. Moreau definitely would make your book if he were a real person. All right, question 2. Cope and Marsh would have loved to work with this mad scientist who figured out how to use ancient dinosaur DNA to bring them back to life. Was it A, Dr. Alan Grant, B, Dr. Henry Wu, or C, Dr. Ellie Sattler?
I believe if I think Alan Grant was in Jurassic Park, but I think he was just the paleontologist. So my guess is it was Henry Wu B.
That is correct. 2 for
Okay.
2. All right. He's actually carried on to the new franchise to be really the main villain.
Oh, okay. And is Ellie Sattler, is she the other one in Jurassic Park, or was she in Contact? Okay.
Yeah, all 3 of them were from Jurassic Park. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
All right. And then our final question here, and I can see they're playing along in the chat because the chat's going crazy here. So I love it. Peculiars. I love that you're playing along. All right. In the film, a little more obscure film, in the film Reanimator, this mad scientist uses his formula to bring people and one cat back from the dead with disastrous consequences. So really fits the bill of some of our scientists who've gone too far in the book. Was it A, Herbert West, B, Henry East, or C, Harry North?
I am blindly guessing C, Harry North.
It was Herbert West was the name
Herbert
of the character.
West.
Yeah, he was our mad scientist, and he really, it's an older movie, but he really embodies the mad scientist who just has this formula and has to test it out without taking any safety precautions.
Do you recommend this movie? I've not heard of it.
You know what? I haven't watched it all the way through. I honestly watched the trailer and thought, oh, this one definitely fits.
Got it. Okay.
It's on my list now. It is definitely on my list to check out now.
Okay.
So, all right, not bad. 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
How
are they doing in the chat? Let's see how they were doing in the chat in the comments. Here we go.
I've been trying to keep track, but
Mike Green says Reanimator is one of the greatest movies of all time.
No, we've been having a great chat over here. Everybody's guessing. Mostly they got it right. I have to tell you, I love the Jurassic Park movies, and they're not good. I mean, but I love them. And my friends who are paleontologists love them too, because mostly that's how people got involved in the first place. I think it's great.
I wish I'd had a lifeline there for the audience. I definitely would have gone with the audience on that one, on the last one. So.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. So this is another question that got asked here. How did you land on the title?
It sort of fits with my other titles in that I wanted something related to the book, obviously, but something kind of intriguing, a little mysterious, and kind of captures the spirit of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we had a list of, 15 to 20 titles, and some probably went a little too far, and some just, were a little too obscure or something like that. But I think going into sending the list to my publisher, I think that was one where I was like, I think that could be a pretty good title because it is vivid. It's not too, where it's going, but it's not by itself too bad.
I don't know if you guys caught this. He's holding an ice pick down here. Did you see that?
Dangerously, yes.
Yeah. Dangerously close to the nether regions, actually.
Yes.
While we're
interesting choice.
While we're talking the mechanics of the book, I did have another question for you about. It feels like there's a pivot, maybe after the dinosaur chapter and into the Nazi chapter, where you, as the author, even admit, okay, we've gotten a little playful. Things are about to get very dark here. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was an interesting way of kind of approaching it. Is there a reason why you kind of put the stories in that order, or do you remember writing that pivot in the book?
I do remember that. The stories are in roughly chronological order, so I think that's why they appeared. I think in an earlier version, they were grouped a little bit more by theme. So I think there was like a medical section, but that came a little early, and it felt a little weird to then jump back in time. So it just worked out better to kind of move chronologically through it. So,
yeah, I feel like the making of a book is a whole party affair. So sometimes things get moved around and you're not expecting them. I still get people asking me questions and I think, is that the order I put it in? I don't remember.
Yeah, which version was that? Yeah.
Yeah, like what? I don't know. I wanted to announce a few winners since you're all winners in my book. I just want you to know. But in addition to your regular winner status, so we have the Lobotomizer cocktail name. You need to email me so I can get you your swag. You have a choice between t-shirt, mug, or book bag, like a book tote thing. So we can do that. Also, we have Mike Breen ended up winning swag as well on this trip, and Susan Ballinger won the signed copy of the book. So Susan Ballinger and Mike Breen, you are winners. Mike, you're going to have to contact me about what kind of swag you want. And Susan, you'll have to send me your address so I can get it to Sam and we can get you a signed copy of the book. So I'm really, Mike Breen's really excited. He says, what?
Congrats.
And a tote. Do you like your tote? Yes, totes are very nice. Susan, you got one before, so you're just a lucky folk. You two, she says, you two regulars. It's true. I was actually really excited about this because what I do is I pick numbers and then I go through and see like I go by ticket numbers and other kinds of things. Susan, you actually won for responding to we reached 100 members on Facebook, so that's what you won for. And Mike, you won as our ticketed member. So congratulations to both of you. And I know it seems like it has to be. Susan, you bought yours. Okay, well now you get a new piece of swag. So hurrah! Actually, no, you get the book, don't you? Wait, I've gotten confused. One of you gets one. You know who you are. Yes. Email me.
Susan was the book. Susan was the book.
Yes, there we go. Susan's the book. So I'm so excited that we can get you guys these things. It is such a pleasure to be able to have someone like Sam on, and your questions have been amazing. I'm always impressed. Yeah, they're really, really good. We had a great time reading this, and also Facebook. There was such a fun conversation going on. Also on Twitter, lots of us were talking about how Edison was a bit of a bastard. Yeah, yeah, a bit. Yeah. Oh, I froze a little bit there, but I'm still here. So just imagine me smiling, and thank you all. And I see everybody saying thanks. Everybody's really excited about being here. And many thank yous to all of you.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
I love all of you, too. Thank you, Mike Breen. Thanks again for being here, Sam. I apologize that my face is frozen. You guys are great, and we'll see you next time. If you're weird, you're family.
You got the blue bottle blues when you wake up in the night. Don't make a big mistake, 'cause you can never make it right. When you reach out for the vial, feel the ridges in the glass. It's a matter of survival, baby, better watch your back. There is no antidote. There is no antidote. There is no antidote. There is no